She's lying, Your Honor. Officer Bradley Thompson pointed an accusing finger at the woman sitting on the witness stand. His voice was loud, full of confidence, as he smirked slightly, believing he had already won. This woman resisted arrest. She was aggressive, violent, and threatened me. I had no choice but to detain her. The courtroom was silent, eyes darting between the officer and the defendant, Jasmine Carter. A tall, fit black woman, she sat with a calm expression, hands resting neatly on the table. But those who paid attention noticed the slight tightening of her jaw, the controlled breath she took. She didn't react, didn't argue, didn't flinch. The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair, turned her sharp gaze toward Jasmine. Miss Carter, do you have anything to say about these allegations? Jasmine exhaled slowly and then, in the most composed voice possible, she said, Yes, Your Honor. Officer Thompson is lying. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The officer's smirk widened. Oh really, he scoffed. You're just a civilian. I am an officer of the law. Who do you think they're going to believe? And that's when Jasmine leaned forward, placed her hands on the table, and uttered a sentence that sent a chill through the courtroom. I am not a civilian, she said, her voice like steel. I am Lieutenant Commander Jasmine Carter, a Navy SEAL. Gasps filled the room. Officer Thompson's face drained of color. The judge blinked in shock. The jury members leaned forward in their seats. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Everyone knew what that meant. The courtroom, once under Officer Thompson's control, had just slipped through his fingers. And that was only the beginning. Hours earlier, Jasmine Carter had woken up to a peaceful morning in Norfolk, Virginia. The sun peeked through the curtains of her townhouse as she sipped on her black coffee, flipping through the day's newspaper. After serving 3 tours overseas, she had taken a temporary break from active duty to spend time with her family. She had seen things most people couldn't even imagine. But none of it compared to what she was about to face today. She had planned a simple day, running errands, checking in on her little brother, Caleb, and stopping by her mother's house for dinner. But as she parked outside a local convenience store to grab a few items, her entire world shifted in an instant. A police cruiser pulled up behind her. Jasmine barely had time to step out of her car before the officer emerged, hand resting on his holster. Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle. She frowned. Excuse me. The officer, Bradley Thompson, was tall with a square jaw and cold, blue eyes. His badge gleamed under the afternoon sun. License and registration. Jasmine remained calm. May I ask why? His lips curled into a smirk. You fit the description of a suspect in a robbery nearby. Her brows furrowed. She had been in this exact situation before. A black woman, minding her business, suddenly a suspect. Jasmine let out a slow breath, keeping her voice steady. I just got here. I haven't done anything. Thompson's smirk didn't fade. He reached for his radio. Code 3. I've got a non-compliant suspect here. Jasmine's fingers clenched at her sides. She knew what was happening. He had already made up his mind. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, he ordered. Her stomach tightened. Officer, listen, Before she could finish, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back. Pain shot up her arm, but Jasmine's training kicked in instantly. She shifted her stance, steadying herself. She could have taken him down in seconds. But she knew better. She was in public. There were cameras. There were witnesses. If she fought back, the story would be rewritten against her. So she didn't resist. People watched as she was shoved against the side of her car, cold metal cuffs locking around her wrists. Suspect detained, Thompson said into his radio. A young woman nearby had her phone out, recording. She didn't do anything, she shouted. This is wrong. Jasmine stayed silent as she was placed in the back of the squad car, staring straight ahead. She had been through worse. She had survived combat zones, escaped ambushes, and carried wounded brothers in arms through enemy fire. But this was a different kind of battle. A battle she was all too familiar with. Hours later, she sat in a courtroom, hearing Officer Thompson spew lie after lie about how she had lunged at him, how she had tried to resist, and how he had barely managed to restrain her. And now, as she revealed her true identity, the air in the room changed. Officer Thompson swallowed hard. The confidence in his eyes flickered. Jasmine sat back, folding her arms. You see, Your Honor, I spent years of my life serving this country. I have led teams in dangerous missions overseas, Missions Officer Thompson could never imagine. And yet, in my own country, in my own neighborhood, I was treated like a criminal for simply existing. The judge looked at the officer. Officer Thompson, do you have a response? His throat bobbed as he searched for words. Silence. For the first time, he realized. He had just lied under oath. About a Navy SEAL. And that was the moment everything changed. The courtroom was deathly silent. Officer Thompson's face was frozen in shock, his mind racing. He had lied under oath, assuming Jasmine Carter was just another civilian. But now, the truth was out. He hadn't just lied. He had lied about a high-ranking Navy SEAL. The judge tapped her gavel. Officer Thompson, you are now under oath. Do you stand by your statement? Beads of sweat formed at Thompson's temple. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Jasmine remained calm, watching him struggle. She could see it in his eyes, panic. He knew he had been caught. The lies, the false accusations, the abuse of power, it was unraveling before his very eyes. The courtroom murmured. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously. The jury leaned forward, watching the officer squirm. Then, the judge turned to Jasmine. Lieutenant Commander Carter, I think it's time we hear your side of the story. Jasmine took a deep breath. Yes, Your Honor. She straightened in her seat, her voice steady but firm. It started earlier today. I had just arrived at the convenience store when Officer Thompson pulled up behind me. I hadn't even stepped away from my car before he confronted me, claiming I matched the description of a robbery suspect. The judge raised an eyebrow. Did he provide any details about the alleged suspect? No, Your Honor. He didn't tell me the gender, height, clothing, or even the crime itself. He simply assumed it was me. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jasmine continued. When I asked why, he didn't answer. Instead, he demanded my license and registration. I complied, but before I could even reach for it, he called for backup, labeled me as non-compliant, and ordered me to turn around. The next thing I knew, I was in handcuffs. Officer Thompson's jaw clenched. The judge turned back to him. Officer, is this true? Thompson hesitated. I followed procedure, Your Honor. She was. Jasmine cut in. I never resisted. Not once. I have been trained in hand-to-hand combat. If I had wanted to resist, you would not be standing there right now. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Officer Thompson's face turned red. That's a threat, he snapped. Jasmine shook her head. No, officer. That's a fact. The judge narrowed her eyes at him. Officer Thompson, you swore to tell the truth in this courtroom. I suggest you choose your next words wisely. Thompson's eyes darted around. He was losing control, and he knew it. But just as the tension reached its peak, the doors to the courtroom burst open. A man in a military uniform strode in. The room fell into hushed silence. He was tall, built like a tank, and his uniform was decorated with medals. His presence alone commanded respect. Commander David Lawson, a SEAL team commander. Jasmine's heart swelled. Your Honor, Lawson said, his voice deep and steady. I am here as a character witness for Lieutenant Commander Carter. Thompson's hands curled into fists. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a legal case anymore. This was about to become a national scandal. Earlier that day, after Jasmine was thrown into the back of the squad car, she sat in silence, watching the world outside blur past. She wasn't angry. No, she was focused. She had been through worse. She had been held captive in enemy territory. She had been outnumbered on the battlefield. But she had survived every time. This was just another mission. She was taken to the police station, where they booked her. The officers didn't even bother reading her rights properly. They assumed she was just another person they could intimidate. One officer sneered. Looks like you got yourself into a mess. Jasmine smirked. We'll see. They tossed her into a holding cell. Hours passed. Then, something unexpected happened. A young officer walked by and stopped in front of her cell. His name tag read Officer Reynolds. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder. Hey, he whispered. I saw the body cam footage. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. And his Adam's apple bobbed. Thompson's lying. He hesitated. And if I don't say anything, I'll be helping him get away with it. Jasmine studied him. He was young, maybe early 20s, still new to the force. She could see it in his eyes. This wasn't what he had signed up for. Tell the truth, she said simply. Reynolds looked down. If I do, I might lose my job. Jasmine's voice was steady. And if you don't, you might lose yourself. A long silence. Then, Reynolds gave a small nod and walked away. Jasmine leaned back against the cold wall. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Back in the courtroom, Commander Lawson stood tall, addressing the judge. Lieutenant Commander Carter has served this country with honor. She has saved lives. She has led missions that most people can't even comprehend. He turned to look at Thompson, his gaze sharp. And yet, today, she stands accused of a crime she didn't commit because of a lie. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward. Commander, are you aware of the events that took place? Lawson nodded. Yes, and I also know that there is body cam footage that will prove it. Jasmine's eyes met Officer Reynolds's from across the room. He had done it. He had turned in the footage. Thompson's face went pale. The judge turned to the prosecutor. Play the footage. The screen flickered to life. And then, the truth was revealed. The video showed everything. Thompson's lies. His aggression. His unnecessary use of force. Everything. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge's face hardened. Thompson's lawyer whispered to him, but it was too late. His career was about to be over. And then, the judge spoke. Officer Thompson, in light of this evidence, I am ordering an immediate review of your conduct. You are now facing potential perjury charges, abuse of power, and excessive force allegations. Thompson shot up from his seat. No, this isn't. Jasmine finally stood. She walked over to him, looking him straight in the eye. And then, in a calm, even voice, she said, You picked the wrong woman. Thompson's breath hitched. And then, bang, the courtroom doors slammed open again. This time, 2 federal agents walked in. Officer Thompson, one of them said, flashing a badge. You're under arrest. Everything fell apart. Officer Thompson's face turned ghostly pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The 2 federal agents, clad in dark suits, stepped forward with a sense of authority that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. Officer Bradley Thompson, the lead agent said, his voice even and firm. You are under arrest for perjury, obstruction of justice, and excessive use of force. Gasps erupted across the room. Thompson staggered back, his hands trembling. What? He stammered. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. Jasmine Carter stood still, watching. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply observed as justice began to take shape. This is ridiculous, Thompson shouted, trying to save himself. I was doing my job. The agents weren't interested in his excuses. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the same kind Thompson had slapped onto Jasmine earlier that day. Irony. Thompson flinched as the cold metal locked around his wrists. You have the right to remain silent, the agent continued. But Thompson didn't stay silent. His panic exploded into rage. You're making a mistake, he yelled. His voice cracked with desperation. She's lying. She set me up. Jasmine tilted her head. Oh, her voice was calm. Funny. I thought I was just a civilian. Thompson's nostrils flared as he realized his own words had come back to haunt him. The judge slammed her gavel. Enough. Her voice was icy. Officer Thompson, you will be taken into custody immediately. This court does not tolerate deception, abuse of power, or dishonor to the badge you swore to uphold. The agents pulled Thompson toward the exit. But as they did, he turned. His eyes locked onto Jasmine's. And what she saw in them was something new. Fear. For the first time, Officer Thompson realized. He had just ruined his own life. And Jasmine, she wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore. Earlier that day, after hours of sitting in the cold holding cell, Jasmine remained still, her mind sharp. She wasn't alone in the cell. 3 other women sat in the corner, whispering among themselves. One of them, a younger woman with a bruised cheek, kept stealing glances at Jasmine. Finally, she worked up the courage to speak. You're really calm, she said, shifting nervously. Jasmine gave a small smile. Panicking doesn't help. The woman swallowed hard. You don't belong here, do you? Jasmine let out a slow breath. No one should. The woman's eyes widened. She hadn't expected that answer. You think we're all innocent? Another woman scoffed from the corner. Sweetheart, wake up. The system doesn't care if you're innocent or not. Jasmine studied the woman who spoke. She was older, with tired eyes that had seen too much. What's your name? Jasmine asked. The woman hesitated. Lena. Jasmine nodded. Well, Lena, I've spent my life fighting battles in enemy territory. I've seen good people treated like criminals and bad people walk free. She looked at the barred door. But no matter what, I believe in fighting for the truth. Lena studied her. And what happens when the truth doesn't matter? Jasmine's gaze hardened. It always matters. Just then, the cell door clanked open. Carter, a guard called. Jasmine stood. It's time for court. Back in the courtroom. The moment Officer Thompson was dragged away, reporters rushed out the doors. This was huge. A decorated Navy SEAL, falsely accused and arrested. A corrupt police officer exposed in court. A federal investigation unfolding in real time. This was about to be national news. Jasmine turned toward the judge, who studied her carefully. Lieutenant Commander Carter, she said, this court owes you an apology. You were wrongfully detained and subjected to unnecessary force. This should never have happened. Jasmine nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. Unfortunately, we cannot undo what you have experienced. But what we can do is ensure that those responsible are held accountable. Jasmine glanced toward the prosecutor's table, where Officer Reynolds, the young cop who had turned in the body cam footage, sat. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod. She nodded back. Not everyone in the system was corrupt. Some, like Reynolds, still had a conscience. The judge continued. As of now, all charges against you are dropped. You are free to go. A murmur of relief spread through the crowd. Jasmine stood, adjusting her sleeves. She had walked into this courtroom in handcuffs. She was walking out victorious. But just as she turned to leave, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Shouting. Footsteps pounding against the marble floor. The doors slammed open again. This time, it wasn't reporters. It was a man in a hooded sweatshirt, shoving past security. His eyes were wild. And in his hand, a gun. Boom. A gunshot exploded through the air. Jasmine instantly reacted, her training kicking in. She dove, grabbing the nearest person and pulling them down. People screamed. The judge ducked. Security rushed forward. Jasmine rolled behind a bench, scanning the shooter. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a protester. He was something else. Something worse. And as Jasmine locked eyes with him, she realized something terrifying. She had seen this man before. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had sent him, and they wanted her dead. The courtroom was chaos. People screamed. The judge ducked behind her bench. Officers scrambled to react, but the shooter was already moving. Jasmine's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from focus. Her training kicked in. Assess. Engage. Neutralize. She peeked around the wooden bench, eyes locking onto the gunman. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't erratic. His stance was controlled. This wasn't some random attack. Jasmine had seen this kind of precision before. Military. He wasn't here to shoot randomly. He was here for her. The man whipped his gun toward the judge. Boom. Another shot rang out. Jasmine moved. She leaped over the bench, tackling the judge out of harm's way just as the bullet shattered the wood where the woman had been sitting. Security finally reacted. A court officer reached for his weapon, but the shooter was faster. He spun, aiming. Jasmine lunged forward. Crack. Her elbow connected with the shooter's wrist, knocking the gun off target just as he fired. The bullet whizzed past a juror's head, lodging into the wall. He stumbled back. Jasmine didn't hesitate. One step forward. Left hand grabs the wrist. Twist. The gun fell from his hand. She caught it before it hit the ground. Click. Aim. Safety off. She pointed the weapon at his chest. Everything went silent. The man's wild eyes met hers. And that's when Jasmine saw it. The recognition. He knew exactly who she was. This wasn't over. Before she could speak, officers tackled him to the ground. Hands behind your back, one of them barked. The man didn't resist. He just kept his eyes locked on Jasmine. And then he smiled. Jasmine's stomach tightened. That was a warning. This wasn't an assassination attempt. This was a message. And she had just received it loud and clear. Hours later, Jasmine sat in an interrogation room, staring through the two-way mirror. On the other side of the glass, the shooter sat in cuffs, silent. Commander David Lawson entered, setting down a folder. We ran his prints. Jasmine exhaled. And Lawson's jaw tightened. Former Marine. Name's Derek Nolan. Dishonorably discharged 2 years ago. Jasmine frowned. For what? Lawson hesitated. War crimes. Jasmine's fingers curled into fists. She had heard of Nolan before. His unit had been accused of atrocities overseas. Civilian deaths. Looting. But his commanding officer had covered it up. Until Jasmine. She had been deployed in the same area. Her team had collected evidence, submitted reports. She had testified, and Nolan had been kicked out of the military. Now here he was, trying to kill her. Lawson leaned in. This isn't a coincidence, Jasmine. I know. Her voice was flat. He studied her. You think someone sent him? Jasmine kept her eyes on Nolan through the glass. His smile still haunted her. Yes, someone had sent him. And whoever it was, they weren't done yet. Earlier that day, after leaving the holding cell, Jasmine had a brief moment of peace. Her mother had called, frantic after seeing the news. Her little brother, Caleb, had texted her, "You okay?" Jasmine had simply replied, "I will be." She had spent her whole life protecting others. Now, someone was coming for her. The pieces didn't fit yet, but she knew one thing for certain. This went deeper than just Officer Thompson. This was bigger, and if someone thought they could intimidate her, they were about to learn the hard way. Jasmine Carter never backed down from a fight. Back in the interrogation room, Lawson folded his arms. We have two options. We let the FBI handle this. Or, Jasmine said, standing up, I handle it myself. Lawson gave her a knowing look. You're not on active duty, Carter. She smirked. Doesn't mean I forgot how to fight. She walked toward the door. Where are you going? Lawson called after her. Jasmine glanced back to find out who sent him, and then she was gone. Meanwhile, a black SUV idled in an empty parking lot, headlights off. Inside, a man in a gray suit held a phone to his ear. He failed, he said flatly. The voice on the other end sighed. I told you, Carter is not an easy target. The man drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. Then we moved to plan B. A pause. Then the voice on the line spoke again. Make it hurt. The man in the suit smiled. Consider it done. And then, he drove off into the night. Jasmine Carter's instincts were screaming at her. She sat behind the wheel of her black Chevy Tahoe, gripping the steering wheel as she replayed everything in her mind. The wrongful arrest. The courtroom ambush. The shooter's smile. None of this was random. Someone wanted her out of the way. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated her. Her phone buzzed. Caleb. She swiped to answer. Hey, kid. Her younger brother's voice was tight. Jazz, are you okay? She exhaled. I'm fine. Caleb hesitated. This whole thing is on the news. They're saying you stopped a shooter in court. That you were arrested. That a cop got taken down for lying. He took a breath. What's going on? Jasmine's jaw tightened. It's complicated. People don't just try to kill you for no reason, Jazz. Her chest ached. He was right. I'm handling it, she said. Silence. Then, Caleb spoke again. Mom's worried. Jasmine closed her eyes. Tell her I'll come by soon. Promise. She smiled. Promise. As soon as she hung up, her phone rang again. This time, it was Commander Lawson. She answered. Talk to me. I ran a deeper check on Nolan, Lawson said. Turns out, he wasn't just dishonorably discharged. Someone paid for his silence. Jasmine frowned. What do you mean? I mean someone has been funding him. Bank deposits in untraceable amounts. Right after his discharge, he suddenly started living in a high-rise condo. No job. No source of income. Jasmine's grip on the wheel tightened. This wasn't just revenge. This was a contract. Nolan had been a hired gun, and that meant there was someone bigger pulling the strings. Lawson continued. There's more. 2 weeks ago, he made a large withdrawal, just days before your arrest. Jasmine's mind raced. Someone paid him to kill me. Lawson's voice was grim. And he's not the only one. Jasmine's pulse slowed. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. And the next attack would be worse. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit room, a man in a gray suit paced back and forth, speaking into his phone. She's still alive, he said, annoyed. Your guy failed. The voice on the other end was calm. It was a test. The man stopped pacing. A test. To see how she reacts. To study her. The man clenched his jaw. And she's more dangerous than we thought. A pause. But she has a weakness. The man's fingers tightened around the phone. What weakness? The voice on the line chuckled. Family. Back at Jasmine's house. Jasmine pulled into her driveway, shutting off the engine. The night air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky. She exhaled, running a hand over her face. She needed answers. She needed a plan. As she stepped out of the car, something felt off. Her gut twisted. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She wasn't alone. Jasmine's training kicked in immediately. She reached for the knife strapped to her belt. her senses sharp. She scanned the shadows, listening. Then, a rustling. Behind her. She spun just as a figure lunged. Fast. Strong. But Jasmine was faster. She sidestepped, slamming her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back. She didn't hesitate. One step forward. Grab. Twist. She flipped him onto the pavement. The man hit the ground hard. Jasmine pinned him with a knee to his chest, pressing her blade to his throat. "Who sent you?" she growled. The man coughed, gasping for air. But he didn't answer. Instead, he smiled and whispered, "It's already begun." Jasmine's blood ran cold. Then, a gunshot rang out. Bang! Jasmine dove for cover as the bullet shattered her car window. A second shooter. A sniper. Jasmine rolled behind the car, breathing hard. She peeked over the hood. The shooter was on a rooftop. Watching. Waiting. She recognized the tactic. They weren't trying to kill her. They were trying to send a message. And that message was clear. "We're coming for you. And worse, we're coming for the people you love." Jasmine's jaw clenched. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. And whoever was behind this, they had just made their biggest mistake yet. Because now, she was coming for them. Jasmine didn't hesitate. The moment the sniper took his shot, she moved. Staying low, she sprinted toward the side of the house, disappearing into the shadows. Never stay in the same position. That was rule number 1 in combat. Rule number 2? Always assume there's more than one enemy. She pressed her back against the brick wall, heart steady. The night was too quiet now. The sniper wasn't firing again. That meant one of two things. 1. He was repositioning. 2. He was waiting for her to make a move. Jasmine's mind worked fast. Think. Analyze. Execute. The first attacker, the man she had taken down, was still on the pavement, groaning in pain. He wasn't a sniper. He was bait. A distraction. That meant the real threat was still out there. Jasmine's fingers brushed over the knife strapped to her leg. She considered her options. Option 1, retreat. Go inside. Lock down da. Option 2, take the fight to them. She smirked. She wasn't the retreating type. She darted along the side of the house, staying close to cover. Her instincts told her the sniper was positioned on the neighboring rooftop. A gust of wind rustled the trees. A streetlight flickered. Then, movement. Jasmine caught the glint of a rifle scope just as the sniper shifted positions. That was all she needed. She ran. Fast. Silent. Precise. She crossed the street in seconds, jumping onto the hood of a parked car and launching herself up onto the fire escape. The sniper didn't see her coming. By the time he realized, it was too late. Jasmine swung herself over the rooftop ledge, landed in a roll, and sprang to her feet. The sniper tried to adjust his aim, but Jasmine closed the distance instantly. One strike to the throat. He choked, stumbling back. She grabbed the barrel of his rifle, twisting it out of his hands before flipping him onto his back. His body hit the concrete hard. Jasmine loomed over him, the rifle now in her hands. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man coughed, clutching his throat. But he didn't beg, didn't plead. Instead, he smiled and bit down. Jasmine's eyes widened. No, but it was too late. He convulsed, foam spilling from his lips. His body jerked once. Then, stillness. Jasmine cursed. Cyanide. This wasn't just an attack. This was a message. And whoever was behind it, they were willing to die to keep their secrets. Minutes later, Jasmine crouched next to the dead sniper, searching his body. No ID. No phone. Whoever sent him knew exactly what they were doing. Then, her phone vibrated. She pulled it out, her breath steady as she answered. "Talk." It was Lawson. "I heard gunshots." "You good?" Jasmine scanned the street below. The first attacker was gone. He must have slipped away while she was dealing with the sniper. "They sent 2, she said. "One got away. The other took cyanide." Lawson cursed under his breath. "They're serious." "No kidding." Jasmine wiped sweat from her forehead. "I need to know who's behind this." Lawson hesitated. Then, his voice lowered. "Jasmine, I found something." She tensed. "Go on." There was a pause. Then, "This goes deeper than we thought." Elsewhere, inside a luxury high-rise penthouse, a man in a gray suit stood in front of a massive window, staring at the city skyline. His phone sat on the table beside him, speakerphone activated. A voice crackled through the line. "The sniper is dead. The other one escaped." The man's jaw tightened. "And Carter?" "She's alive." Silence. Then, A slow, measured exhale. She's becoming a problem. Yes, sir. The man turned, his dark eyes cold. Then we escalate. Back at the police station, Jasmine stormed into Lawson's office. He shut the door behind her, face grim. You're not gonna like this. Try me. Lawson grabbed a file from his desk and slid it toward her. She opened it and froze. Inside were photos, surveillance images, bank transactions, classified documents, all pointing to one name. A name she knew, a name she hated. Her former commanding officer, Colonel Victor Maddox. Jasmine's hands clenched into fists. This can't be right, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were true. Maddox had always been a ruthless, power-hungry man. But he had been protected by the system. And now, he had just made this personal. Lawson sighed. Maddox was quietly discharged last year. Official reason? Health concerns. Jasmine laughed bitterly. That's code for, we found dirt, but he knows too much to take down publicly. Exactly. Lawson leaned forward. The problem? Maddox didn't retire. He's been working in the shadows, laundering money, hiring mercenaries. And now, he pointed at the file. Jasmine already knew. He's the one who sent Nolan. Lawson nodded. Jasmine's blood boiled. Maddox was a coward, a man who used his rank to protect himself while others paid the price. She had spent her whole career bringing down men like him. And now? Now he was coming after her. Lawson studied her. Jazz, you know what this means, right? Jasmine's lips pressed into a thin line. Yeah, it meant this wasn't just about her anymore. It meant her family was in danger. It meant she had one option left. She had to take Maddox down. For good. Meanwhile, Maddox sat in his private jet, sipping whiskey as he read through a file. Jasmine Carter. The woman who had testified against him. The woman who had ruined his career. The woman who had just survived his first attempt to kill her. He smirked. That won't happen again. He turned to the man sitting across from him. Activate Plan B. The man nodded. And her family? Maddox swirled his whiskey. Smiled. Make them suffer. Back at Jasmine's house. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. And her heart stopped. It was a photo. Of Caleb. Tied to a chair. His face bloodied. A message underneath. Come alone. Or he dies. Jasmine's vision blurred with rage. Her hands trembled. Her body burned with pure, unfiltered fury. Maddox had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because now, Jasmine Carter was out for blood. Jasmine Carter stared at the photo of her brother. Caleb. Beaten. Tied to a chair. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every part of her body screamed for action. She didn't shake. Didn't hesitate. Instead, she breathed in. Focused. And then, cold determination took over. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Come alone. 2437 West Harbor. 11 p.m. No cops. No backup. Or he dies. She checked the time. 10:23 p.m. She had 37 minutes. Jasmine clenched her jaw. She needed a plan. She hit Lawson's number. He answered on the first ring. Jazz, what's? They have Caleb. Lawson swore. Who? Jasmine's voice was ice. Maddox. Silence. Then, Lawson's tone hardened. Where? West Harbor. They want me alone. That's a trap. I know. Lawson exhaled sharply. You're not going in alone. Jasmine's grip tightened on the phone. I have to. No, you don't. We can. No time. She ended the call. This was her fight. Her war. And tonight, she was ending it. West Harbor, 10:58 p.m. Jasmine arrived alone. The docks were silent, the air thick with the scent of salt and gasoline. Dim streetlights flickered. A single warehouse loomed in the distance. 2437 West Harbor. She parked her Tahoe, stepping out slowly. No weapons visible. Hands loose. But that didn't mean she was unarmed. She had a knife strapped to her thigh, a Glock tucked against her back, and years of training burned into her reflexes. They thought they were hunting her, but she was hunting them. She walked forward. A black SUV was parked near the entrance. Tinted windows. Armed men inside. They were watching her. Waiting. She didn't stop. At exactly 11 p.m., the warehouse door creaked open. A man stepped out. Tall. Broad shoulders. Colonel Victor Maddox. His smirk was slow, deliberate. Well. Jasmine didn't react. She just stared at him. Didn't think you had the guts to come alone, Maddox continued, hands in his pockets. Jasmine's tone was flat. Where's my brother? Maddox chuckled. Oh, he's here. Alive. For now. Jasmine's jaw tightened. Let me see him. Maddox smiled. Not yet. First we talk. Jasmine's fists curled. I didn't come here to talk. Maddox's smirk widened. See, that's what I always liked about you, Carter. No nonsense. Just like in the SEALs. Just like when you decided to betray your own team. Jasmine's nostrils flared. I didn't betray anyone. No. Maddox tilted his head. Then tell me, what would you call testifying against your own commanding officer? She stared at him, eyes cold. Justice. Maddox's smirk vanished. For the first time, his eyes darkened with rage. You ruined my career. His voice was low. Dangerous. No, Jasmine said. You ruined your own career. You thought you were untouchable. That no one would ever expose you. She took a step closer, her voice sharp. You led operations that got innocent people killed. You covered up war crimes. You sold out your own soldiers for profit. Maddox's jaw ticked. Jasmine's voice hardened. You weren't a leader. You were a coward. And you still are. Maddox exhaled through his nose, composing himself. Then he grinned. Well, he said, coward or not, I'm the one with the upper hand now. He snapped his fingers. Footsteps. Jasmine turned, just as two men dragged Caleb out of the warehouse. Her heart clenched. His face was bruised. His lip busted. Hands tied behind his back. But his eyes were defiant. Jasmine locked onto him. Caleb. Jazz, he muttered, voice hoarse. Don't. One of the men slammed an elbow into his ribs. Caleb grunted. Jasmine's anger ignited. She forced herself to stay still. Wait. Watch. Maddox smirked. Here's how this works, Carter. You hand yourself over. No fight. No weapons. No resistance. Jasmine didn't blink. And your little brother gets to walk away. A cold silence filled the air. Jasmine's pulse slowed. He was lying. Even if she surrendered, Maddox wouldn't let Caleb go. She had two choices. 1. Comply. Hope she could find a way to save Caleb after. 2. Fight. Take them all down now. She rolled her shoulders. And chose option 2. Maddox saw it. And smiled. Kill her. The moment the words left his lips, Jasmine moved. Chaos. Jasmine lunged. Fast. Brutal. Precise. She grabbed the nearest thug, twisting his wrist and snapping it like a twig. He howled in pain. Gunfire erupted. Jasmine dove forward, rolling across the pavement as bullets whizzed past her. She yanked her Glock from her waistband and fired. 1 shot. 2 shots. 2 men dropped. Maddox backed away, cursing. Kill her, you idiots. Jasmine was already moving. She sprinted toward Caleb, but one of Maddox's men grabbed her from behind. He tried to choke her out. Bad move. She slammed her head back into his nose, then flipped him over her shoulder. Crack. He hit the ground, out cold. Jasmine spun toward Caleb. One last thug held a gun to his head. Drop it, the man shouted. Jasmine froze. Her breath steady. Her finger on the trigger. She met Caleb's eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. Then, Caleb moved. He stomped on the thug's foot, twisted his body, and threw his head back, right into the guy's nose. The man stumbled. Jasmine fired. 1 shot, right between the eyes. The thug collapsed. Caleb gasped for breath as Jasmine rushed to untie him. Are you okay? She asked, cutting the ropes. He coughed. I will be. But they weren't done yet. Maddox was gone. He had slipped into his SUV and sped off into the night. Jasmine clenched her jaw. This wasn't over. Not until she put Maddox in the ground. She turned to Caleb. Come on. Where are we going? He asked, still catching his breath. Jasmine reloaded her gun, eyes burning with fury. To finish this. Jasmine Carter had one goal. End this. Caleb sat in the passenger seat of her Tahoe, his breathing still ragged from the beating he'd endured. But he wasn't broken. If anything, his eyes held the same fire as hers. You sure you're okay? She asked, her hands gripping the wheel as she sped down the highway. Caleb exhaled, stretching his sore wrists. Not my first fight, he muttered. Jasmine smirked. I taught you well. His lips twitched. Yeah, but you never taught me what to do when I'm tied to a chair getting punched in the face. Jasmine's jaw clenched. That's because I didn't think I'd have to. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. Maddox had gotten away, but he was wounded. Wounded enemies made mistakes, and she was going to use every single one against him. Her phone rang. Lawson. She answered. Talk to me. I got a location on Maddox. Jasmine's grip on the wheel tightened. Where? Private airstrip. North side. He's trying to get out of the country. Jasmine's eyes darkened. Not happening. ETA, she asked. Lawson sighed. 30 minutes. Jasmine glanced at the speedometer. She could do it in 20. I'm on my way, she said, hanging up. Caleb glanced at her. You're not seriously about to take on a war criminal in the middle of an airstrip, are you? Jasmine didn't blink. That's exactly what I'm about to do. Caleb cursed under his breath. You're insane. Jasmine smirked. No, I'm a SEAL. And tonight, she was going to war. Northside Airstrip, 11:48 p.m. Jasmine cut the headlights as she pulled up behind a line of storage crates. The air was thick with humidity, the faint smell of fuel burning in the distance. A private jet sat on the tarmac, its engines already humming. Maddox was here, but he wasn't alone. Jasmine scanned the area. 6 guards, all armed. She turned to Caleb. Stay in the car. Caleb tensed. No way. Caleb. Not happening, Jazz. I'm not sitting here while you go in alone. Jasmine exhaled. Fine, but you follow my lead. Caleb nodded. Jasmine popped the glove compartment, pulling out a second handgun. She passed it to him. He checked the clip. Still got your bad habit of keeping a loaded gun in your truck? She smirked. Still got your bad habit of questioning my methods. He shook his head, smiling. Let's do this. They moved. Jasmine led the way, keeping to the shadows. The guards were positioned around the plane, watching for incoming threats. They weren't expecting her. She took out the first one silently. A quick strike to the throat, a knee to the ribs, and the man dropped. Caleb caught his gun before it hit the ground. Jasmine signaled, move forward. They crept toward the plane. Then a voice. Hold it right there. Jasmine froze. A guard had spotted them, his rifle aimed directly at her chest. Her mind raced. Options. 1. Shoot first. Risk alerting the others. 2. Play along. Buy time. Jasmine raised her hands. Let's talk about this. The guard snorted. Yeah, right. Then, Caleb moved. Fast. He lifted his gun and fired one perfect shot. Right between the guard's eyes. The man hit the ground without a sound. Jasmine blinked. You've been practicing. Caleb smirked. Figured I'd pick up a few things from my big sister. She shook her head. All right, let's finish this. Inside the plane, Maddox was in the cockpit, barking orders at the pilot. Hurry up. We need to be in the air in 5 minutes. The pilot nodded, flipping switches. But then, the plane door slid open, and Jasmine Carter stepped inside. Gun raised. Eyes cold. Maddox froze. His men turned their guns on her, but she was faster. Bang. Bang. 2 guards dropped. The rest hesitated. Jasmine tilted her head. Anyone else want to try me? Silence. The remaining guards exchanged nervous glances. Then, they dropped their guns. Maddox's face turned red with rage. You. He took a step toward her, furious. Jasmine fired a shot just past his ear. He flinched. Move again, she said, voice low, deadly. And the next one won't miss. Maddox's breath quickened. He clenched his fists. You think this is over? Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. No, I think you're over. She pistol whipped him across the face. Maddox stumbled, blood dripping from his lip. The pilot had his hands raised, eyes wide. I don't want any part of this. Jasmine nodded toward the door. Then leave. The pilot ran. Caleb entered, his gun still raised. He glanced at Maddox. So this is the guy? Jasmine nodded. Maddox spat blood onto the floor. Kill me, then. Be just like me. Jasmine stared at him. Then she shook her head. You're not worth the bullet. She pulled out her phone. Dialed. The call rang once before Lawson picked up. Jasmine's voice was calm. Come get him. 1 hour later, police station. Maddox sat in handcuffs, seething as officers hauled him inside. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing. This was national news. Jasmine stood with Caleb and Lawson, watching as Maddox was dragged away. Lawson exhaled. Damn, you really did it. Jasmine nodded. Yeah. Caleb nudged her. So what now? Jasmine watched as Maddox disappeared through the station doors. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. She smirked. Now. She clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Now I'm hungry. Caleb laughed. Burgers? Definitely. As they walked toward her truck, Jasmine took one last look at the police station. Maddox was done, and her battle was finally over. Or at least, for now.